So first, for segment one, we have Pope Watch. So this article is called Pope Francis Removes Vatican Official Behind the Document Barring Blessings for LGBTQIA Couples. And so basically, the Pope is cool with people getting married, especially discriminated people, the LGBTQIA plus community. And so the official who originally said that that wasn't okay was, I guess, demoted. So what does everybody think about that?
So I'm going to let Richard
I
take the lead on this one.
Yeah, I was just going to take the lead on this one. I
Nice. Slow.
This is to me it screams of damage limitation. When we have a look at what actually happened when the Archbishop Miranda first put this out, he actually asked for it. The Pope was in full knowledge that this was going to be published, essentially, and he agreed to it. Seemingly, the article says it gave his assent to it, so he knew all about this. And then all of a sudden, when there's backlash, we've got good old Miranda becoming a scapegoat for the Pope. There seems to be, it seems to be cut and dried if you look into the facts of it.
Yeah. The first thing I thought was scapegoat, right? But what also got me about it was that he was demoted. He wasn't removed. He wasn't fired. He was just kind of like sort of silently moved on from one job position to another, and he gets to maintain his what do you call it? He still gets to be called an archdiocese, right? His title, there it is.
Yeah,
Yeah,
his title's attached to him as a person, not to the
not his
position.
position.
I think it was. So even though he's technically been demoted, he's still got the same title. It seems a little bit weird.
Yeah. So I'm with you that this really does feel very reactionary to the backlash that they got, right? So I suspect, as you two do, that the Pope was in full knowledge of the letter that came out that said that LGBT couples can't get married, and I think he was fully in support. But when he started getting a backlash from his actual congregation, he realized he's got a problem on his hands, and so I think this guy was allowed to take the fall for him, and I think that the way they did it is very similar to the way that they handle, the child molesters and stuff in the church, where they just sort of move them along to another place and hope that everybody eventually forgets about it.
Yeah, one thing that struck me about this was that in the article it says that the Pope reached out to the gay Catholic community, and one of the people it cites is a nun, Sister Gramick, is it? Uh, and on her 50 years of LGBTQ plus ministry, that doesn't seem like a member of the gay Catholic community. Essentially, this is a woman she's been uh, patted on the head for doing well and going amongst all those dirty gay people and preaching the word. But yet she's considered as part of the community. That's how distanced they are from kind of real life.
Yeah.
Yeah. August, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. Back to kind of your point about the elephant in the room is the Catholic Church has been alleged to have a bunch of child sexual abuse um, cases. And what was actually very interesting about this article was that it said that the guy who was demoted was actually part of the department, I guess you would call it, or congregation that deals with those cases and quote unquote handles them, or rather does not handle them. So I just thought that was another like, oh, that actually makes a lot of sense. That's not coincidental. So that kind of that part I yeah, got my attention for sure.
I'm kind of glad you brought that up. It's the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. right? And one of their roles is to kind of interpret doctrine, but another role is to handle the cases of clergy sexual abuse to minors. And I thought when I was reading that congregation in and of itself is problematic because now you don't just have the church
Absolutely.
overwatching itself for its own doctrine, which I completely agree with. I'm having that sort of oversight within an organization to make sure people are following its own doctrine. But now you're talking about a part of the church that's responsible for legal oversight of what their employees, for lack of a better word, are doing. And so now you have, instead of the law or some outside agency looking in on these cases, you have an internal agency looking in on these cases. And I find that to be incredibly problematic.
Yeah, and another thing I wanted to mention was I think I might have originally read the article slightly different than the two of you. I guess I kind of, for a little bit, was like, okay, well, as much as this is, very much a scapegoat situation, I was like, okay, well, for half a second, maybe people will start being more understanding and less discriminatory. I was very optimistic. And then I was thinking about it and I was like, because a lot of people just follow the religion that they already have biases towards the doctrines that they agree with. And so they'll just choose that certain religion. So I feel like, I wonder if some people are even saying, like, well, he's not really Catholic if he's saying that being gay is okay, which is really funny because he's the head of the Catholic Church. But I wonder if people are saying that.
Yeah, for me, this was the major kind of thing of the article. I'm glad you brought that up because that is what I'm torn on over this, and not just within Catholicism, but in all religions. And I think in one aspect, the Pope coming out with this, despite its kind of underhanded kind of thing behind it, is going to encourage a lot of Catholics to be more open towards gay people, more understanding towards gay people, and that's good. This, without a doubt, that's good. And you know, on one hand, or on the face of it, at least we should applaud a progressive Pope. Uh, he's coming out and is willing to apologize to the LGBTQ plus community, and they're not all going to do that. Not all religious leaders would do that. But the fact is that the offense occurred in the first place. And,
Yeah, good point.
to reach out, which I do suspect is kind of to stop people leaving the church. I did a bit of background reading on this, and overall Catholic numbers have increased. The percentage of Catholics in relation to the world population has dropped. So the people are being born into the Catholic Church and numbers are going up, but overall the numbers are coming down. It's an exercise in damage limitation, realistically. And
Yeah, oh, go ahead.
so I was just going to say, I noticed in Laura's notes as well that Laura touched on this point as well, that Christianity has changed over the years to survive. And it's continuing to do so in this. And that's how successful religions become successful religions. They've all done it to a degree. None of them have remained static. They all move with culture and time, and geographically they all adapt to get into the new cultures they come into. But are progressive religions traditions better than hardliners? Because bad thinking is bad thinking at the end of the day. And it's okay saying God belief is justified in the first place, but I'm not entirely sure if progressive is really a good thing for secular community at large. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Well, you bring up a couple of good points, but and I want to hear August's thoughts on your latest point, but I kind of wanted to go back to the first point that you guys were making about the Pope and whether there's like a silver lining, and I kind of wanted to put in my 2 cents because I had more of an optimistic outlook than I think maybe the two of you did, or maybe just as optimistic. But I really do think in the long run, churches adopting these kinds of positions where they're saying, "Oh no, 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 we're not anti-LGBT." it might not actually be their stance, and it might be very painful for them to make those kinds of statements. And they might even have the really hardline congregants who think they're being contradicting or are going against their own doctrine. But the positive impact that this will have in a generation or two, if not immediately, I think outweighs any sort of hypocrisy in the sense that at the very least, less people are being harmed. And I mean, I agree with Gilliver that watered down religion is bad thinking, regardless of how harmless it is, and there's a case for that certainly. But I really do think that whether he was put in a corner or not, this public of a declaration can only help the LGBT community towards less oppression and in the long run, less people seeing them as being something outside of the Christian faith or the Catholic faith, right? Like a little bit more accepted within those communities.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree, and I did make a note of that in my notes. Uh, there is a big counterpoint to the argument I've just made about bad thinking, and that's that the more likely people are to be progressive in the short term is going to be a benefit to individuals, and I made a note about in Muslim countries where in the world there are 11 majority Muslim countries where homosexuality is potentially, not always, and it hasn't always been, but potentially punishable by death.
Mhm.
And if you get those progressive leaders coming out in those countries, that's really going to make a difference to individuals' lives. It's going to make the difference. The more
Literally.
of these people come out, the more Pope figures you have in those kinds of countries. And it's not just Islam, it's Hinduism, it's lots of different cultures, sub-Saharan African cultures as well. But the more individuals come out and take a stance against it, while still retaining those beliefs, then the more progressive it's going to get, and that's going to stop people. It's punishable that by death in some countries to get thrown off buildings,
Yeah.
and the more people we can stop being lashed or thrown off buildings or stoned to death, which is another punishment for homosexuality in some of these countries, the better. So that is a big, big, hard counter argument.
Yeah, and Laura brought up a point that kind of stuck with me too, like the fact that maybe the change will be more gradual, like over generations. Like maybe we won't see anything drastic right now, especially with the older generations who are, what people say, stuck in their ways. But then maybe the younger generations, like both of you were mentioning, will become more progressive because that's what they grew up with. And people sometimes have a tendency to stay with what they were, raised on. So maybe we won't see any, dramatic changes right away. But I do think like the Islam point, I think it really could at least help. I think it's going to be a slow change. Societies, and I mean, it's always kind of a slow moving process, but yeah, I think over the long run this will be a good thing. I hope at least.
Yeah, I
Yeah, and I
think,
think
and
there's
that. Sorry, Laura, go on.
no, I was just gonna say really quickly that even in the immediate future, there's a lot of people that are on the border about their feelings, whether they want to support or whether they think it's a sin to be part of the LGBT community. And so those people that are on the border are very likely to shift in regards to how their religious organization thinks. So, and I hate to like sort of dehumanize them in the sense of like, oh, they'll just follow whatever direction their organization pushes them in. But there are those borderline people that will, like, just flat out, right? So there will be sort of, I think, at least a positive slip in the right direction. And then you're gonna have those hardliners that, like August said, like they're in either a generation or a time in their lives where they're just stuck. And it doesn't matter what the Pope says, they'll hate the Pope before they start to embrace people that they've already decided they don't like.
Yeah, I think it's and I'm going to go back to Islam again, just simply because it's a good black and white case to use. I
Mhm.
think you can see that this actually within a couple of generations does start to occur. Because if you have a look at Muslims, certainly in Britain, I can't speak for America, but in Britain, and I know a lot of Muslim people, I've got friends who are Muslim, and none of them would consider stoning somebody to death because they were gay. But they're
Right.
happy to live and work amongst them, and even count them as friends. And I think that shows how quickly this can change if someone's like entire culture focus changes. And I think that's good, and it can be demonstrated to work pretty quickly. In the grand scheme of things, if the conditions are right for that to come to fruition.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more, and it kind of goes back to what was in my notes that you had mentioned earlier about the interplay between cultures and religion. So, religion, people see it as this like monolith that's stuck in its ways and it's so ancient. And I will agree that on average, religious bodies tend to adapt slower to cultural trends. But in order to survive, there's a point where the religion has to. It's like do or die, right? And especially in cultures like our own, where there's so much driving force that like, I know a lot of Christian churches now are really, really struggling to keep up numbers and to get people, to come into the church, and a lot of that has to do with a lot of their hardline beliefs and beliefs that are really against human rights and against personal autonomy, and so the more they adopt those beliefs, the more that the church or the longer the church will survive. And so I think the same is true with Islam eventually. So it's insulated in a lot of those Islamic dominant countries where Islam is like the state religion. There's a lot of insulation there and a lot of protection from outside influence for Islam itself. But as soon as it leaks into Great Britain or America or any of these countries that are not predominantly Muslim, there's a lot of mixing of ideas, and that's where the pressure comes from. And so I'm hopeful with you, Richard. I think Islam's gonna be a heck of a lot slower than Catholicism, but I think that the more that the congregants start to change their minds and the more that they see other people as being human or as deserving of rights, the less the ruling bodies are gonna have the ability to continue to oppress those people.
Um,
Yeah. Sorry, go on, Autumn.
that's all right.
August, sorry.
That's okay. I also wanted to hear your opinion on, like, he just said that they could receive blessing, but they didn't necessarily come out and say this isn't a sin and they're not going to hell for it. And they can, I mean, I guess it's sort of in a roundabout way does, but I wonder what you guys think about like using that specific terminology of sin. Because that's just such a sticking point for them to love the sinner, hate the sin. And so it's like, well, if the Pope's saying that's not a sin anymore, then I mean, what happens then? I just wanted to hear what you guys thought. I think it was interesting.
Magee.
Yeah, it really is open to interpretation the way that they did it, because you're right. They're not saying um, that outright being gay is okay or good or godly. They're just saying that priests and dioceses and archdioceses have the right to bless the union. But you're right. Like you can bless a sinner who's, say, a thief, and that doesn't mean that stealing is good, and that doesn't mean that they are saying that the thief is going to heaven. So you're right. It's very, very tricky language, and it could very well
Mhm.
be exactly like what we were talking about with the covering up of the outrage, right? Trying to appease the people who are outraged without also appeasing those who disagree with allowing gay marriage or gay unions.
Mhm.
Yeah, I get the distinct impression they're trying to walk a tightrope
Mhm.
and keep the traditionalists and the up and coming progressive Catholics all in one basket. That's I can't help but do it. I might be being cynical doing that, but that's how it comes across to me. That's how the whole from initially reading the article, That's it. That's the first thing that jumped out at me. That this is it's an exercise in damage limitation. We've got that's what it is. We're going to put the blame on this guy because we don't want to like offend our gay members, really. But at the same time, we're not going to go the whole hog and say homosexuality is fine. You can be gay and happily get married and have children. We're not going to go that far, but we're going to put out like throw a few crumbs.
What do you think, August? Do you think that they were just trying to appease a noisy, outrageous part of the congregation?
I mean, yes, I think it's a little bit of everything. It's the trying to appeal to the people who are becoming more progressive, and there's a lot more gay people that are out, and so now especially these young Catholics are like, hey, but my best friend is gay and I don't want to believe that they're going to hell. And then I also think that, there are so many people that were Catholic and then leaving it because either they were gay or they just didn't believe that being gay would send you to hell or whatever it is. I feel like it's probably mostly to save their own asses, but yeah, I don't know. It's all up to interpretation, which is I think they use such cloudy language that it's just so wishy-washy that it could be put any different way. So I know that doesn't really answer what you're saying, but just kind of yes and
No, it
no. I don't know.
does. Yeah, I think we're all three in agreement actually that ultimately whatever came out of this was vague and could have some good positive effects in the future, but wasn't necessarily anything like earth-shattering in terms of the Pope changing his mind.